Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our presentation today on our webinar. So welcome to today's webinar on understanding the coming out process to allow others in. This webinar is sponsored by the Northeast and Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC, housed at Rutgers School of Health Professions, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation. My name is Katy Rivera, and I am a project coordinator of our center and also a facilitator for today. The MHTTC is funded by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health and other related workforces to deliver evidence-based and empirically supported practices to individuals with mental illnesses. Please visit the MHTTC Network website for additional information at mhttcnetwork.org. Also, please sign up at this bit.ly link on the slide featured to receive notifications of our activities. Next slide, please. Before we begin our webinar, I wanted to quickly review some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is part of a series on affectional and gender diversity. We have 2 more webinars coming up in this series. Opioid use in the LGBT+ community on June 30th, as well as addressing blended family and trauma issues with affectional and gender minority parents on July 28th. I will be sending an email with these updated dates after the conclusion of our webinar. We also wanted to ask you to complete the survey that you'll receive via email following this webinar. We value this feedback and use it to improve our activities and inform future activities. The surveys are also important because our continued funding is linked to the completion of these surveys. So we thank you in advance for your feedback. Next slide, please. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Next slide, please. And lastly, this webinar will be interactive. On your screen, you will have a taskbar with buttons that say Q&A and chat. Please use the Q&A feature to ask our presenter questions throughout the presentation. I will collect your questions and as we go and ask them of the presenter during the Q&A time towards the end of the presentation. During the webinar, our presenter may pose questions to you. So please use the chat feature to answer these questions. There may also be some polling questions which will pop up on your screen where you can respond. Next slide, please. Now let's begin our webinar. Dr. Zazzarino is an assistant professor at Rutgers University in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions, where he is currently a core faculty member in the master's program in rehabilitation counseling and the doctoral program in psychiatric rehabilitation. Additionally, Dr. Zazzarino is the field experience coordinator for the counselor education and supervision track. Previously, Dr. Zazzarino has provided instruction for professional education courses for New Jersey supported housing agencies, implementing community support services, or CSS. And Dr. Zazzarino is actively presenting at state, local, national, and international conferences related to sexual and gender minorities, multiculturalism, psychiatric rehabilitation methods, counseling services, housing, and supervision practices. In addition to his work at Rutgers University, Dr. Zazzarino continues to conduct clinical work by facilitating group therapy for adolescents and adults at an intensive outpatient program, providing outpatient counseling service at his private practice, and providing clinical supervision for counselors who need supervised clinical hours in New Jersey. So welcome, Dr. Zazzarino.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining me again. If you have been on the other webinars, thank you for coming back. So like Katy had mentioned, this topic is specifically on the coming out process. And I'll say, when I actually work with adolescents or teens or adults about this, I just don't like the phrase coming out process. It is a phrase that people use. I like to flip that a little bit and work with my clients and talk about the letting others in process. And I think that's a much more empowering message. It's a much more it gives somebody more of a sense of control. So I preface this presentation with typically when I work with people one-on-one, I'm more about the letting in, not the coming out. For the presentation though, I think I'll just stick with the language I think that most people are aware of. So there will be some opportunities really shortly to chime in and add some comments in the chat box. So I really encourage you to do so. I'll be bringing some of that into our discussion. So today, I really want to just discuss some of the benefits and unintended consequences of coming out. I think throughout this hour-long conversation, we'll recognize how individualized and unique a process this is for every single person. We'll identify strategies to support people in their coming out process and illustrate special considerations related to this process for different groups of people. So I like to start with this quote because, and I could not find where it came from, but I love it. It says, coming out and living openly aren't something that you do once or even for 1 year. It is a journey that we make every single day of our lives. Every coming out experience is a unique experience and must be navigated in the way most comfortable for the individual. Whether it's for the first time or the first time today, coming out can be an arduous journey. It is also a brave decision to live openly and authentically. So I hear this, and I think it reinforces the piece that we do need to look at every single person as a complete, unique individual. When I read this quote, I am immediately brought back to my life as a 20-year-old. And I will share that it took me about 20 years of my life before I actually openly came out as a gay man to my family. And some of the stuff that I'll talk about in here, I'll kind of connect to my personal life and see like how things might have gone well or how things didn't really go well. Because I think, you know, the stories that we see and the stories that we hear about the coming out process, you know, could color the lens at which we work with people. So we'll get into it. And I think we'll get into it first by just having a really open dialogue. And I really would love to see some comments in the chat box here about what do you think are some of the benefits of coming out? So what are some good things that teenagers, young adults could get from letting others in? I'll reframe it here. To be able to love freely, right? Just letting things go and be able to love and be loved by whom they choose to. To be able to be honest. Okay, so we have freedom, we have honesty, no longer living a lie. Ooh, thank you. You are all just chatting away. I love it. Be true to themselves. So I see authenticity, less anxiety, experiencing a feeling of connection and understanding. Okay. So now I also want you, it's an opportunity to be more authentic, live a life of freedom. Not that this is a competition, but this is the most conversational that I have seen my webinar. So congratulations, all participants. You are getting an A for today. Let go of shame. Take a load off of your chest. So think about those words, right? Think about some of the things that I've just said out loud. Being brave, being authentic, being genuine, being honest, having freedom. All of those words really do shape and shift the way that we view how we can work with people in this process, right? They may tilt our decision to maybe help somebody in this process a little bit more, or maybe move somebody a little bit more forward, right? Because we always have to recognize our views, our understanding, our own personal biases do shape how we interact with the people that we work with. Okay, I see this. Thank you. We're going to segue to the next piece. What are some of the risks or consequences of coming out? So I see being ostracized and cut off from family, being rejected by people in your life, fear of losing family, abandonment, individual risk, rejection from friends, homelessness, death, isolation, harm. So just as we can read and just as we can recognize all of the benefits, right, of coming out, self-hate, the loss of job, loss of church family, we also have to validate and recognize that there are some really difficult negative risks and consequences that really do shape one's decision for coming out, which makes this such a unique process. So I talked, I guess, a slide or two ago about my own journey, and I will share as we go through this. You know, I had a really supportive family growing up. So when I came to the realization of, okay, this is who I am, I thought, okay, this would be great. You know, I'll just tell my mom and that'll be it and we'll be fine. And I didn't have any other support at the time. And I remember telling my mom at 20, we were watching American Idol. I could picture it clear as day. And it was a commercial break. And I had just told her, and I said, you know, Mom, I just want to let you know that I'm dating someone and that person's a guy. And her reaction was not what I had expected. And it was a really negative reaction. So some of these consequences that you all listed are some things that I dealt with at that time. My mom and I actually did not talk for about 2.5 years. And that was like that was a really tough struggle to work with. Looking back, and as we keep talking about this a little bit more, I wish I kind of thought about it a little bit more and went about it in a different way. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how the research advises us to work with people. Fast forward, my mom and I relationship is totally fine now. So I'm grateful for the ability to reconnect, but I was also hoping that never really would have had to happen. So these are some of the benefits that we talked about, right? Statistically, it's important to know that youth who are out to their immediate family and those who are out at school are more likely to report being happy than those who are not out. So we know that people who are out or let others in have a greater sense of happiness. We also know that people who are out to their immediate family are twice as likely to report having an adult in their family that they can talk to when they're sad. So even when there are moments where things might not be going great, they are still able to communicate and talk with others. The third one here is we know that youth who are out to their immediate family or at school report a higher likelihood to achieve several life goals compared to those who are not out. So there really are some long-term impacts about a really successful, more positive coming out story. Weighing out both sides, we also have to recognize that there are some risks, and I think you all did an excellent job of typing some of them, being kicked out. 19% say that they are scared of rejection, they're afraid, and they don't know how their family will react. 30% say that their family, and this is specifically with youth, say their family is not accepting or is homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic. 10% say that they're just not ready. 10% don't or can't talk with their family, and 16% say that they have religious reasons why they are not out. And these are all really good conversations to have, and we'll talk about how to have them when we're working with youth and adults, right? And there's a slide about special considerations for adults specifically, but recognizing it and the value of both the benefits and the risks, and not letting one, right, or not letting our own values, our own judgments persuade that conversation. So how do we support people in their quest to let others in? One of the ways is to help people recognize that they're going to experience the full spectrum of the human emotion. They may go from happy to sad to angry. And it's important for us to create, just like we always talk about, right? We need to create that supportive environment so people feel like they can experience the full spectrum of human emotion. You know, you might go from somebody who heard a story of a friend who came out and had this really supportive family, and they're like, oh, great, I'm going to do it. I'm going to feel so excited. I feel brave. I can go out and do it. And then they go to try and they get nervous, and then they don't. And then you might see them and, you know, they might feel down on themselves, or they might, you know, get sad or depressed. Well, I'm not good enough. Why can't I? So you're going to see a full range of emotion in this. And similarly to what we talked about already in terms of it being such an individualized process, we need to know that the person themselves is in the driver's seat. They get to decide how they come out, where they come out, when they come out, and with whom they come out to, or with whom they let in. And this is a really interesting, I find this to be a really interesting concept, because I supervise currently about 5 counselors in the state of New Jersey as they work towards their hours for licensure. And over the past 3 years, I have heard conversations from my supervisees working with youth and working with people and adults, and them talking about, well, my client needs to come out and talk about it with their family. And I have to really sit with the supervising and ask them, where does that come from, right? Is that your desire? Is that your feeling? Or is that the client? Is that the person's feeling themselves? And because we all can be so empowered and be so open and supportive and encouraging, it tends to perhaps push us in the direction of supporting and maybe requesting that our clients or the people that we work with come out a little bit sooner. And we need to really make sure that we are taking that step back and we let the client or the person we support, they are the person in that driver's seat. So all of this, oh my God, it is totally such an intimate and personal discussion. And we'll sorry, I shouldn't be reading the chat. I get distracted. This is really the journey that we are going to take in terms of understanding how to work with different people at different stages on their journey. And I'm going to tell you, something I really like to look at is this process is really no different conceptually as any other change process. Right? So the way I always like to work with people within this process is really grounding it in the concept of motivational interviewing. So with all of these stages, I'm going to share a little bit about, you know, how to, or what the person might be feeling, right? And what the person themselves might be experiencing. But then also from the support worker or the support end, what do we do, or what can we do in this stage? So first and foremost, it's important to help to know that the person needs to begin to be open with themselves, right? That's stage 1. And in reality, if you think about it, that stage is kind of like the pre-contemplation stage when we meet and we talk about the stages of change, right? They're not really sure if they want to come out yet. They're not quite sure what they're feeling. They might not even be sure what their affectional or gender identity is at that time, right? So they might get scared. They might be confused. They might feel proud. They might feel a whole bunch of things. And I love this little picture, right? Because the person themselves has to be able to look at themselves in the mirror and feel comfortable with who they are in that point. This is where I will say I think I went wrong in my journey. I will say I don't think I was comfortable yet and just did it to do it. But from our standpoint, right, from the support worker standpoint, we need to recognize that if the person is not really comfortable with this yet, we just need to be there to build support, right, and build that trusting relationship. So in this step of the process, our role is just to build that unconditional positive support for that person, right? We are allowed to just create that safe space and listen and allow for the person to just begin to identify and begin to understand maybe who they are or where they're at. And this could happen at very many different stages. Deciding to tell others, right? So now, if you're working with somebody and they've really began to understand, okay, I might have an affectional orientation or an affectional identity that is not heterosexual. Maybe I am gay, maybe I am pansexual, maybe I am bisexual, or maybe I am transgender. Maybe my gender identity is not that of a cisgender individual. Now they're starting to think, well, how do I do this, right? How do I tell other people? And for that person, if you think about it, they really are in that contemplation stage of change, right? So I'm aware of who I am, and now I'm aware that I think I want to tell other people. I'm not quite sure. There is that ambivalence, right, during this stage and during this process. So deciding to tell other people, who do I tell? How do I tell people? In what form do I tell people? And this is where, from a support worker, to do what we just did earlier, right? Weighing out the benefits, weighing out the consequences of the risks, could be a really helpful decision or really helpful intervention to do with somebody during this process. And some of these things are exactly what you all talked about, right? Becoming a role model for others, being a part of a strong, vibrant community, living an open and whole life, developing closer and more genuine relationships, building self-esteem, and then also exploring those risks, right? Some relationships might permanently change. This is where at the end of the conversation, the only person who then gets to decide what the next steps are is that person themselves. And as a support worker or as a worker just kind of supporting anybody throughout this process, if the decision is to not come out and to not tell people, we also have to be okay with that and allow the client or allow the person to then bring it back up if they are ready to again. And that could be really difficult for some of us because we recognize all of the benefits, but we also do have to recognize these risks as well. So going right along in this process, so they've decided to come out and tell people, what do we do next? We develop a plan, right? And this is similar to the stages of change. So we went from pre-contemplation to contemplation to now the preparation stage. So in this planning process, you're really trying to figure out what kind of signals are you getting from people around you. You can get a sense of how accepting people will be by the things that they say. So now you're trying to help teach and guide the people that you work with to say, okay, increase your awareness a little bit. Let's think about what are the signals, what are the signs, what are the comments that you're hearing. The other thing I think that we also have to recognize is for the person themselves, how well informed are they themselves about LGBTQ+ issues? Because what inevitably happens is the onslaught of questions from loved ones. Well, what about this? What about that? So having the information will then hopefully decrease some of the anxieties of others. Do you even know what it is you want to say? Particularly at the beginning stage of this process. Many people are still answering tough questions for themselves and not really are ready to identify as being lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual. And that's okay too. I remember when I had come out, I did not say I was a gay man for a good 2 or 3 years after that. I think I felt more comfortable on my continuum, on my trajectory, to say I'm dating someone and that person's a guy. That felt more comfortable to me than coming out. And I think we get to play around with certain things with people when we're working with them. Say this, how does this feel? Okay, now let's role play a little bit and let me pretend that I'm your parent or your friend. What would it feel like for you if you said it this way? So really helping in that planning process to keep people comfortable on how to say and what to say. Really talking to people and exploring, well, do you have the support? So a support system is an invaluable place to turn to for reassurance, and really helping that individual explore, well, after they understand what signals they have, what support systems are there in place? Who maybe might be the best person to tell first, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Is this really a good time? I find this happens often when I work with youth, where they're in the middle of an argument with the parents, and in the middle of the argument, they just blurt out and say something along the lines of, well, you don't really understand me, and that's fine, but I'm transgender, I'm gay, and then they storm out of the room. And I think what I've been trying to help people understand is the timing of it all, and, you know, having a well thought out conversation that's not fueled by emotion and yet is done in a way that's really clear, that could maybe, even for some parents, could maybe model really good communication skills. But helping people understand, like, when is the good time? And not to say that we are suppressing or we're minimizing one's sexual or affectional or gender identity, but we're trying to create the most appropriate time and space for them to feel most comfortable. Yes, I am the supporter that would say people should feel comfortable who they are whenever they want, but in the reality of it all, that's not what's really going on. So being aware of major life concerns that might make it difficult, right? So with youth or even with adults, like thinking about like anniversaries or holidays, or when is really the best time. And sometimes in conversation, you might recognize no time is the best time, and then you just got to pick a time and go. Can you be patient? Some people will need time to deal with this new information. So just as it took time for many of us to come to terms with our own affectional and gender identity, when you come out to others, or when people come out to others, they have to be prepared to give them the time they need to adjust to what they've said. And having that conversation ahead of time is really important. I always say this, it took me 20 years to be okay with identifying as a gay man. Probably took me about 23 years to say that. And now here I am expressing it to how many are 100 people. My expectation that my mom was just going to be okay with that right then and there was not grounded in reality, knowing who she was. So for me, I needed to understand and allow that space to happen as well. You know, if any of you have ever been on any of my other webinars, I really do equate a lot to just different examples that I have been seeing across television in this pandemic, which I will say I have watched way too much television. But if anybody has watched the episode or watched the TV show of Baker and the Beauty, it comes on ABC on Monday nights. There's an episode where one of the characters comes out in a heated argument, which I would not recommend, but then the dad actually is having a conversation with the daughter and just says this: exact thing. You know, it took you some years to be okay with it. Let's just give mom a little bit more time. So really being patient and understanding that other end of the conversation as well. So how do you really have conversations? So now, if you think about it, we've moved from making a plan into actually having the conversation. And this could still be in the preparation or the action stage, right? So from a support frame, we might be really role-playing a lot of different conversations with people. We might be just providing that support. It's important to understand in this piece of the whole continuum that it's really normal for the people that we work with to want or hope for positive reactions from the people that they tell. However, a person who's just had someone come out to them might feel slightly different. The person themselves on the receiving end, right? So whoever your client, whoever the person is that's coming out, the other person might be really surprised. They might feel honored. They might feel uncomfortable. They might be scared because of exactly those negative or consequences that we talked about earlier. Some loved ones might feel those same things as well, and that might color their reaction. One of the greatest things that, you know, a lot of the research always talks about is really starting with someone that you believe will have the most support, that will be the most supportive. And that really translates to me the idea of when we set goals for people, right? We set goals that are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, in a time frame. And we set them so that we can achieve goals because it then motivates us and it builds up our self-esteem and self-efficacy. Starting with someone that you believe is the most supportive will help that person feel even more empowered and embrace their decision to move forward if that's what they've chosen. We always encourage people to find a relaxed, private place to have that conversation because it is a private conversation. You know, maybe out at a restaurant is not the greatest idea, or at the dinner table at a holiday function. People will usually take the cues from the person, which is why I always encourage people to have that conversation in a really mature, calm, well-informed manner that demonstrates confidence and demonstrates understanding, because the person hearing or seeing this conversation, the person, they might take the same response or reaction from the person coming out. And then this is a whole other conversation to have with the people that we work with. The continuum of coming out. You know, just because somebody wants to express their affectional or gender identity in certain forums does not mean that they want to express it in every forum. And this is also a really individualized process and understanding. And so sometimes we as support workers really get to help people explore and weigh out the pros and cons. And I'll talk about a specific population in a little bit that this really does impact. But so you're starting with yourself and understanding how, you know, you're opening up to yourself, then you come out and then you can live openly. But then understanding in which capacity, and it's important to understand this before you keep moving on. This slide here, telling family, is, if you notice, a little bit different. It comes after having conversations because the research typically shows that peers tell peers first. Telling family, and maybe not even just the immediate family, but extended family, is also a part of the process if the person wants to. So again, when we're in this stage, right, we are supporting people with just helping people have conversations. How do they want to have these conversations? Where do they want to have them? Let's kind of role play different scenarios and what your parents or who you might be talking to about this, how might they react and what will that feel for you. So in the idea of telling family members, no matter what their age, many people really are afraid that their parents are going to reject them if they come out. The good news is that you're probably wrong, but not always. And I've seen this a couple of times, like how do you do that reunification? Just as the person themselves will feel a gamut of different feelings, so will family members, and so will people who your clients are talking to, or who the people that you're working with, who they're talking to. Some parents might react hurt. They might feel honored and appreciated. They might grieve their dreams that they've had for you. They might even ask what went wrong if they caused this. Even in 2020, some of these reactions are still happening. Some may be, some may call being LGBT a sin, right? Or an attempt to send their child to a counselor to change them. This is still happening. Part of that reunification process, or trying to bridge that relationship, or gain that relationship, starts even before the person tells a family member. And this is why it's so important to work with the person themselves to say, okay, are you well informed? What are you going to do if your parent says this? How are you going to react? The more control the client or the person themselves has over that coming out story or that coming out process, the better they're going to be at reacting to maybe a not so nice comment. So we start bridging that gap before the gap has already been made. The other way to bridge that gap, in case it goes in some of these more negative directions, is maybe being a support with them. You know, always having, maybe talking to the people that you work with and say, hey, do you want somebody present when you tell your parents? Or do you want, you know, if it's in a counseling relationship, as the counselor, I've been present with the family members. A lot of times it comes down to education, you know, providing people with education and resources. Specifically, I'll tell you, when it comes down to religion, right? When religion is an issue, I have found trying to link parents who think negatively or have a negative reaction with people of a similar faith or a similar spiritual practice. So for instance, I grew up Catholic. And whenever I work with people who are from a Catholic background, and parents might have a really difficult time of trying to wrap their head around it, I will try to find another family member that's also from a Catholic religion to help maybe guide in that process. The research does really highlight that when people are of the same mindset or the same philosophical framework, there's a greater instance of actually hearing what the other person has to say. So they might actually get some better information and hear what somebody else has to say, even more so than you. And that's okay, right? Our goal isn't to be the one with all the answers. Our goal is to help foster that relationship and maybe seek other people that might also be able to support that answer. So this is really just an overview slide of really how to match the process with the support. So very similar to what we just talked about, I just wanted it on one concrete slide so that when you get this, it could just be a reminder. But as you can see, you're really just starting with relationship building. You're helping the person explore their decision and maybe doing so in a very structured way of weighing out the benefits and the consequences. In the planning process, you're really helping them strengthen their change talk and kind of set timelines on that. You're doing a lot of role playing. You're doing a lot of conversation about positive relationships. That's a big one. in this piece, really helping people explore what a positive relationship within this new dynamic would look like. And then doing a lot of skills teaching and role playing and UPR, unconditional positive regard. Because as people then step out of that comfort zone and start talking and having these conversations, like we mentioned, not every reaction is going to be perfect. They need to have that one person that still provides an unconditional positive regard. And that's so critical throughout all of this. There's a really good, because I know that religion tends to play a role in these conversations and throughout a lot of the literature in terms of where these conversations go wrong. The HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, they have, and at the end, there's a whole bunch of resources that I'll give you. They have a really good 20-page pamphlet, well, it's a PDF, it's not really a pamphlet, but specifically on how to live openly in your place of worship. And they navigate the conversation all through where does the struggle come from? Why is it important for somebody to be open in faith, in a faith community? Why are they maybe even thinking about delaying the coming out process? How do you come out to your religious leader, being a teacher, and just coming out and living openly within this time frame or within this place of worship? And what these 5 overall, I think, bullet points that are listed here really represent is kind of how to go about it once somebody makes the decision in a place of worship, right? How to prepare yourself to do that. So one of the things that I kind of mentioned already is seeking spiritual guidance. So as a person of faith, the conversation with yourself about the benefits and repercussions of coming out in your faith community may lead to a conversation of a higher power. Whether through prayer, meditation, or reading, it's a good idea to seek guidance from the sources of inspiration at the core of faith. And that really is an individualized thing as well. Read. Like I said, we talk about knowledge. I'm going to say it, and it's a corny phrase, but knowledge is power, right? We know that if people have the knowledge that they'll need when they have conversations, they're more fully informed, and it makes other people recognize that this is something that this person is taking seriously. So reading specifically here what religious scholars have to say about sexuality and gender identity can be a valuable way to learn how people from diverse traditions have challenged this idea. And there's a lot that's written right now that affirms gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people of faith from many different religious perspectives. They actually give you religious organizations at the back of the guide that can really assist the person. Find a supportive community. So deciding to live openly is a personal process, but it's not something that the person's going to want to take on alone. So find a supportive individual or group within that the place of worship that you know that will support you. And very similar, assess the situation, make a plan, and understand that current religious leaders and place of worships may or may not really accept what that person is going through, and that you might have to understand, okay, well, maybe I need to look for a different place of worship or a different religious practice. So really helping people explore and ask questions like, what do you know about your religious leader? So do you know if your religious leader is open and diverse from the pulpit? Does he or she talk about LGBT people? So again, it's just bringing more awareness so you can see those signals and see what's going on. Special considerations, I think, need to be thought through a little bit more on coming out in terms of gender identity. So when somebody decides to come out as maybe transgender or gender diverse or gender neutral, it's important to recognize the idea of how to have that conversation about pronouns. Was it last month? Yeah, last month there, and if you look on our website, you'll see a webinar directly related to gender identity, but it's about how to have that conversation about pronouns, how to have a conversation about name identification. And this is where it gets really difficult and where the support and special considerations have to come into play, because I today might identify as Anthony, and maybe next week I realize, well, my gender identity is not of a man, and I identify as a female and want to go by Mary. For many people in my life, they might see me as Anthony for, I almost call myself 26, for 37 years, and it's going to take other people time to associate who I am with my identified name. So in reality, what's going on is people are constantly coming out when it comes time for gender identity. And sometimes they're forced to come out even when they're not ready to. And that's, that's an important concept to really think about. Gender affirmation surgery, who's going to take care of somebody after that process, and making sure that, the people around them, they are going to know that, and that's really another part of that coming out process. And then the last piece is that you have to be able to have these conversations about identity, and gender identity is often misunderstood, disrespected, and disbelieved. I kept trying to find really concrete evidence and research about the coming out process related to gender identity compared to the coming out process related to affectional identity. And sadly, our research is not up to date. I would hypothesize that coming out related to gender identity has more negative consequences than coming out with based on affectional identity. But that is just all anecdotal and no research to support that. But hopefully people begin to break out affectional identity from gender identity, especially in terms of research, because then we'll know at the core what can we do specifically for both groups of people. The other consideration, I think, is also as we see more and more adults, maybe later in life, come out, the person themselves might experience a lot more questioning, a lot more reflection, like a lot of what ifs, right? Like, I'm 38. What if I would have come out at 20? What would my life be like? What would my relationships be like? And this really could create a sense of confusion and guilt, maybe a little bit of betrayal and rejection and heartbreak throughout this time of questioning. We think, I've lived my life 38 years like this, and if I'm not as comfortable right now, perhaps, I could have been. There's a lot of implications for work relationships, long-term friends, and even children and spouses. A lot of times people might feel like, well, the person has been lying to them their whole life. There's that lack of trust. This is where I talk about the coming out continuum. Maybe, especially if it comes to affectional identity, maybe they might only come out to their friends and family, but maybe not at work, because they fear that there might be some ramifications at work. This is where, related to gender identity, they might be forced to come out at work if they decide to live their truth and, live with the gender that they identify as. And then people at work are going to then recognize, okay, well, Anthony is now asking me to call him Mary or her Mary, and then they start recognizing what's going on. So there's a lot of considerations here in terms of when you're weighing out the pros and cons. With children and spouses, what are the children going to think, and how will maybe parents co-parent even after this? So when we're talking about adults in the coming out process, it's just a different layer of things to think about. The same core and the same concept is still there, but it's just another piece of the puzzle to really explore. This is a big time of transition for an adult, but these kinds of questions are really different than the types of questions you would have with somebody who might be 18 or 19 or 16 or 14. So just thinking about that a little bit more. I see some comments about the Trevor Project. I absolutely love the Trevor Project. It is one of my resources in the end. They have so many great supports and great resources. The other thing really is just to provide this, because I don't know how many people actually recognize that there is a National Coming Out Day. And I'm conflicted, and I'll be completely honest, I'm very conflicted with this. I see the benefits, and then I also see some of the drawbacks. And every year around this time, I'm working with more and more youth that get have increases in suicidal ideation and just increases in depression right around now. Because for some people, you know, that National Coming Out Day is a really great time to gain exposure, to help people understand that there is nothing wrong with being lesbian, gay, or bisexual, or pansexual, or asexual, or transgender, gender diverse. So this really is a great opportunity for exposure. And then you see really positive stories of people who have come out, and, you know, everybody loves it. And then I think of the other side of it. Thank you for that. Yes, yesterday was Pansexual Visibility Day. You know, and then I think of the other side of this in terms of what about that 16-year-old boy or that 16-year-old identifying female who doesn't feel ready to come out yet, and how it might increase their own fear or their own self-stigma or their own shame. So I love the visibility piece of it, and I also recognize that other people might struggle with this. So I always throw this out there because I think it's important to know that October 11th is National Coming Out Day, and it has some great positives. So we're aware if we are working with people. I've also seen this day where I've seen this more and more where people will come out on social media because they feel like they need to, and they haven't really navigated those questions or really build the support. So for us, if we're helping people, you know, and it's like September, in the back of your mind, you're going to need to think about and have a conversation about what is October 11th going to mean for you, and how do we plan for that? So I bring that to the table. Before we get into questions and answers, there is this last slide, which there is the website, and you can try to find some of the past webinars that I've done. But these are the resources that I was talking about in terms of the Human Rights Campaign has put out some really good resources on the Coming Out Project. Specific issues and specific concerns related to gender identity, or they specifically are only focused on transgender visibility. Here's a full resource guide to Coming Out, which really does shape a lot of what we talked about. Here is the, I didn't put that. Here is the guide for living open in your place of worship. And there's also, I'll add this and send it to Kati, so when Kati sends it out, you have this resource as well. There is another guide specifically that addresses the African American population as well. And we know that throughout different races and ethnicities, there's other barriers as well. So when we work with people, we need to look at it from many different intersections of their life. And then the last resource, I think I always give out because I do love them, the Trevor Project. But that's about all I have for today. I have about 4 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Cesarino, for providing us with such a wealth of information on this topic. We do have a few questions that came into our Q&A feature. And one is, one person is saying, Trevor is great for youth and younger adults, but what are some other like groups for adults of an older age that maybe you could recommend?
I always talk about I'm just going to specifically say in New Jersey, there are practices and support groups through like NAMI, even the National Alliance for Mental Illness. They do support groups for adults as well within the LGBTQ plus population. There's also little community centers that will offer adult groups as well. I just honestly, unfortunately, just know my area, but I know in New Jersey, Asbury Park, Ocean Grove, Highland Park, Newark, Jersey City, even in Freehold, New Jersey, there's some other groups, but there is, if you Google adult groups for the LGBTQ plus population, you can also find one. So sorry, I can't give you any specific ones on that.
I see. Well,
Wait, somebody just posted, how do I feel about coming out on social media? To answer that question, I would say it really does connect to the person themselves. I think I'm of an age that I view social media very differently than, teens view it today. I think it's a really important conversation to have, though, with the teen in terms of, once you put it out on social media, it's out there forever, basically. So having the conversations about that. And at the end of the day, if that's what the person wants to use as their vehicle, because then sometimes you just put it out there once and you don't ever have to, have the conversation 25 times. That might be more beneficial for the person. So it's just different.
Yes.
Sorry, Kathy.
It's okay, absolutely. And we have another question here from someone saying, being heterosexual, will the person's clients be able to talk to him or her, or should they try to refer to someone they could relate to of either who's a lesbian, gay, or bisexual?
That's a really great question. I think that we work with a whole bunch of different people, and everybody's experience is so unique and individualized that it really boils down to that relationship. So if, as a gay man, I went and talked to a heterosexual cisgendered counselor, and that unconditional support, that genuineness was there, and the education and knowledge was there, I feel like I would be just as comfortable because I feel like I can trust that person. I've also had some experiences that I'll share that I've gone to a counselor and where I became the educator and had to then educate the counselor about all different issues. And then I felt like, this person isn't aware enough. I don't feel like I can trust him or her. And then I've sought out other people. I don't think it comes down to a heterosexual, non-heterosexual thing at all. I think it really boils down to openness, awareness, and education.
I see.
Yeah.
And then just respecting everyone's time, we're going to just answer one more question before we end the webinar. And I apologize in advance if I didn't get to all the questions. Someone here says they manage a crisis center and they have several different versions of the Safe Space stickers, but what is the most well-known or recognized in the country?
Regarding the safe space stickers, you know, I always say that every region, there's so many different things out there. I always encourage people just to find one. You know, I think people recognize when they feel or they are attending a safe space. One of the most recognized safe space, I think, signs is just the rainbow flag. I think and I also have qualms about that as well, but I think it is one of the most recognized safe space things. And I'll even say, like, lately in all of this, just running around communities in this time, there's a sense of calm when I see a rainbow flag in, you know, a place of business. Like, it's a sense of you recognize that there are differences and that you're welcoming of that. So
Sure.
that would be my answer.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zazarino. So I just wanted to remind everyone, well, number one, thank you for joining us. And I will be sending out a link to our evaluation survey, a link to our presenter, Dr. Zazarino's slides, as well as any resources he'd like to include, and a certificate of attendance. This will all be sent to you no later than tomorrow. So if you have any other questions, my contact information will be on the email. If we didn't get to a question and you have, if you'd like to request an answer, I can forward it to Dr. Zazarino. But again, we thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Zazarino, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.